What you're hearing now is the Heart Sutra being chanted by Zen master Taisen Deshimaru and his European Sangha. It is chanted every day in the same way here at the New Orleans Zen Temple. Whenever I see depictions of Buddhist figures like those in the current exhibition, Buddha and Shiva, Lotus and Dragon, it's as though I can hear the Heart Sutra being chanted. Hello, I'm Reishin Collins, Abbot of the New Orleans Zen Temple. So how did this centuries-old text and chanting practice find its way to New Orleans? It was brought here in 1983 by the temple's founding abbot, the late Robert Livingston Roshi, seen here with me in 2016. Robert brought the sutra from Paris, which was transmitted to him along with the practice of zazen or sitting concentration by his Japanese master, Taisen Deshimaru, the one you heard leading the chanting. His master was Kodo Sawaki, who transmitted the practice to him, and so on, master to disciple, supposedly all the way back to the Buddha. This transmission of the teachings is what we hear in the Heart Sutra, and it's also, in a sense, what we see depicted in several works in the exhibition. I'll be focusing on a few figures in the sculptures: Shakyamuni Buddha, or the historical Buddha, Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva of compassion, and Shariputra, the Buddha's foremost disciple. And I'd like to view them through the lens of the Heart Sutra, especially its insistence on the later Mahayana Buddhist philosophy of emptiness, or in Japanese, Coup. The sutra begins by introducing Avalokiteshvara, who answers a question that Shariputra, the smartest but not always the wisest of the Buddhist disciples, asks: how to practice the highest wisdom, the great wisdom that goes beyond. The Heart Sutra is Avalokiteshvara's answer. It is compassion's teaching to intelligence. It is the wisdom of the heart teaching head wisdom a lesson. And it is the most concise summary of Buddhist philosophy that we have in just 268 characters. Or perhaps I should say of Mahayana Buddhist philosophy, in which the Bodhisattva is the ideal. What's a Bodhisattva? While it means enlightened being, the Bodhisattva in practice is someone who vows to save or to take care of all beings, putting off their own nirvana in order to enlighten others. Now, I'd like to read just the middle of the sutra now, what Avalokiteshvara actually says to Shariputra about how to practice the highest wisdom. And this is from Deshimaru's interpretive translation. So the Bodhisattva of Avalokiteshvara, through the profound practice of great wisdom, sees that the five aggregates are empty, Coup, and thus helps all suffering beings. And this is where Avalokiteshvara begins to speak. Shariputra, phenomena, or shiki, are no other than emptiness, or Coup. Coup is no other than shiki. Shiki becomes Coup, Coup becomes shiki. Form is emptiness, emptiness is form. It's the same for perception, thought, action, and consciousness. Shariputra, all existences are Coup. They are neither born nor extinguished, neither impure nor pure, and they neither grow nor decay. Thus, in Coup, there are no five elements, no six sense organs, no six sense objects, no six consciousnesses, neither ignorance nor the extinction of ignorance, neither old age nor the extinction of old age, neither death nor the extinction of death, no Four Noble Truths, no wisdom, no attainment, but only the attainment of no attainment, mushutoku. And here Avalokiteshvara's teaching ends, but there's a little coda that says, thus the Bodhisattva, through this profound practice, has a mind at peace and is without fear. All illusion and attachment have been cast aside, and the Bodhisattva attains the ultimate satori. All the Buddhas of past, present, and future attain this understanding of great wisdom that delivers all beings from suffering and enables them to find nirvana. So what Avalokiteshvara has to say here is pretty devastating. He's telling Shariputra that everything he's learned from early Buddhism about what constitutes the nature of reality is mistaken, including the Four Noble Truths, that life is suffering, that there is a cause of suffering, that there's a way to cease suffering, and that the way is the Eightfold Path. Now, like the philosopher David Hume, Avalokiteshvara rejects such common sense proofs of reality like phenomena, sensation, thought, action, and consciousness. And since they are empty, as he puts it, they cannot constitute any essential reality. But devastating as that realization may sound, it is actually very comforting. Because when we realize that form is emptiness, and emptiness is form, through the practice of selfless and goalless non-attachment, not only is our own suffering eliminated, but the suffering of all beings, as the sutra says, is transformed. But let's begin with the Buddha Shakyamuni with kneeling worshipers from 14th or 15th century Myanmar, although I think worshipers is a misleading term, and I'll tell you why in a moment. The Buddha is depicted in hieratic scale, more of a temple monument than a human being, richly gilded and sculpted in stylized detail. Note the elongated hands, fingers, and ears, and the arched eyebrows, and the broad shoulders and forehead that result in a heart-shaped head and torso. The mudra of the hand touching the earth is the sign of his coming to the realization of non-self-existence, his enlightenment, and touching the earth as witness to his casting out of delusion, seen here in the form of Mara at the base of the sculpture. Now he's flanked on each side by his top two disciples, Madhyayana, known for his psychic powers, always on the Buddha's left hand, and Shariputra, known for his intelligence and eloquence, always on his right. Their proportions, which are a fraction of the Buddha's size, signify their relative symbolic importance and spiritual attainment. They are small and unpolished, all too human, like us. And I think we are intended to identify not with the Buddha, but with them. Not so much as worshipers, which I think is a misleading term in any case, but as students willing to learn. Because what is depicted is essentially a lesson being delivered in silence. I want to talk about what that lesson is, but first it might be helpful to know how these two boyhood friends, companions in their spiritual search, ended up at the foot of the Buddha. It's an archetypal story, one that may sound familiar if you've read Hermann Hesse's Siddhartha, for example. One day, these two boyhood friends wake up after one night on the town too many and trade in their stylish clothes for beggar's rags. This launches them on a search for an enlightened teacher. And they find a clever Brahmin who recognizes their rhetorical skills and makes them teachers. But they're not quite satisfied with this easy success. Now, one day, Shariputra runs into a young monk who displays an attractive and uncanny serenity and equanimity. He asks the young monk who his teacher is, and of course, it turns out to be the Buddha. When they finally meet the Buddha, he certifies their enlightenment pretty quickly, It takes just a week for Madhyayana, due to his psychic powers, I suppose. And Shariputra gets his after another week, since he's a bit slower on the uptake and has to think things through intellectually. Now, many statues of the Buddha might seem to invite us to see Shakyamuni as a model of serenity, and it probably accounts for the popularity as a household decorative item that you can pick up at any world market or Target. And it is all very well to admire the Buddha's serenity, but for serious seekers like Shariputra and Madhyayana, or like some of us perhaps, we might be interested not only in admiring the Buddha, but in emulating him or attaining what he attained, the attainment of no attainment, as Deshimaru puts it. So the question is, what is the Buddha silently teaching through his posture, his expression, and his gesture? How do we cast out delusion ourselves? This was precisely the question that Shariputra asked, and which the Bodhisattva of Compassion answered in the form of the Heart Sutra. But the statue contains the whole answer, although it is silent. The answer is twofold. First, we have the posture of Zazen, in which the Buddha sits, and the mudra of touching the earth, both of which attest to his enlightenment. And second, we can see for ourselves the Buddha's physical and facial expression and the attitude of mind that these embody. And we see in the Buddha something of the attraction that this young monk held for the two friends, that uncanny equanimity. This is the attitude of mushutoku, or selfless non-attachment, with no motive of profit or personal gain, which only comes after a clear grasp of the philosophy of non-self existence. Not through intellectual understanding, but through the practice of deep samadhi, or absorbed concentration in Coup, or emptiness, in Zazen. As Deshimaru said, during Zazen, with mushutoku mind, we plunge into the universe of Coup. This absorption is so deep, in fact, and so beyond language, that only the Buddha's silence can express it. Avalokiteshvara's answer in the Heart Sutra, we might say, is the voice of the Buddha's silence. Or as Shokahaku Okamura so accurately puts it, this sutra takes place within the Buddha's Zazen. Avalokiteshvara is the Buddha's voice, the Buddha's spokesperson, so to speak. The badge of authority and inspiration can be seen in the crown that contains an image of the Buddha. Avalokiteshvara puts into words what cannot be put into words, for the benefit of Shariputra and for others who, like us, find it difficult to do without words. But if Shariputra is so wise, why does he need these endless lessons? I said earlier that the clever Shariputra was a little slow on the uptake compared to his psychic friend. He is often called the wisest and the most eloquent of the Buddha's disciples. But like many Zen students, he's often more clever and glib than wise and eloquent. He's a little too attached to the forms and can miss the spirit. As a matter of fact, it's his very cleverness that slows him down. It also causes him quite a bit of trouble and ridicule. Like the students of Socrates, Shariputra always has something new to learn, and often at his own expense. He's like that top student in the class who asks the questions we're afraid to ask. We might make fun of him, but we secretly admire him because the ridicule falls on him instead of us. For example, in the Vimalakirti Sutra, Shariputra gets a lesson on non-attachment very similar to what he learns in the Heart Sutra. He's sitting with several bodhisattvas and chief disciples, listening to the enlightened layman Vimalakirti debate the bodhisattva of wisdom, Manjusri. An apsara, or celestial being, like the ones in this reconstruction from the Dunhuang cave paintings, flies overhead and showers them all with fragrant flowers. Shariputra notices that the petals are sticking to his robe and to the other disciples' robes, but not to the robes of the bodhisattvas. And he tries to shake them off, saying that they are not in a state of suchness. He's a stickler for monastic purity. He's offended by the decoration of these petals. The apsara lets him know that the problem is not in the state of the flowers, but in the state of his mind. It's not the flowers that are clinging to you, she says, but you who are clinging to the flowers. In Heart Sutra terms, Shariputra's state of mental attachment is due to his not fully understanding the nature of emptiness. The apsara then drives home the point by turning Shariputra into a woman and herself into the form of a man. He tries to shake off this new appearance that's clinging to him until she proves to him that this too is due to his attachment and his discrimination against women in general. Perhaps a jab at the gender inequality inherent in early Hinayana Buddhist monasticism before the Mahayana reforms. Then, after some Socratic banter about whether he's a male in female form or a female in male form, she goes on to demonstrate the folly of judging things by their appearance, but even more important, the folly of judging things by what they are or are not. She concludes by saying, hence the Buddha said, all things are neither male nor female. In other words, Shariputra still suffers from the attachments that come of dualistic thinking. This is not uncommon with intellectuals, of course, who like to show off their critical thinking skills by splitting hairs and making distinctions without a difference. To put this another way, Shariputra's misconception is due to an epistemological illusion that results in an ontological delusion. Clinging to the early Buddhist idea that our self-existence is constituted by form or phenomena, sensation or perceptions, mental concepts, action or volition, consciousness, he mistakes appearance for reality. When we cling to the sensory organs and their objects, our minds are obstructed. But when we understand that such appearances are essentially empty, we can drop our attachment to them. Unobstructed, our minds become free from the desire to keep what we have or to attain more, and thus free from the fear of losing what we have, including our life. In the most famous line from the Heart Sutra, form is emptiness, emptiness is form, form becomes emptiness, emptiness becomes form, form is exactly emptiness, emptiness is exactly form. All dualistic discrimination drops away. Only the free or empty heart, unobstructed mind, can realize this essential teaching. So, to return to the silent teaching of the Buddha and Shariputra, or Buddha with Shariputra and Madhyayana, we need to realize that with the Heart Sutra, we're coming in very late to a long philosophical debate on the nature of existence. It's like hearing only the conclusion of a Socratic dialogue. While the complexities of that debate are beyond the scope of this talk, we need to know that Shariputra's early Buddhism and its assumptions about the nature of reality are being refuted and revised according to Mahayana principles of non-self-existence. Now, there are three kinds of wisdom. First is the mundane wisdom of the worldly wise. Second is what Shariputra has, the metaphysical wisdom of early Buddhist ontology, which at the time consisted of the Sarvastivadan philosophy of how we construct reality of what are called, as I've said before, the five skandha: phenomena, sensation, thought, volition, and consciousness. This is where he gets that. This is the view that the Heart Sutra, again, refutes and revises, saying that these are all empty. Now, the third type of wisdom is the transcendental wisdom of Mahayana Buddhism in the Heart Sutra. The title is, after all, the Prajna Paramita Sutra, or what can be called the perfection of the great wisdom that goes beyond. This is the wisdom that exists before knowledge. Pra, like pre, means before, while jhana, like gnosis in Greek, means knowing. This is often referred to as original wisdom, the wisdom of grasping the self we are before our parents are born, or simply beginner's mind. Now this, as Deshimaru says, is the essential theme of the Hanya Shingyo, the Heart Sutra, the philosophy of Coup, or emptiness, the infinite wisdom that emanates from Coup. When we experience Coup consciousness, recognizing the emptiness of all existence as we have been taught to know it, we can look on the world as Shariputra could not. That is, through the lens of non-attachment or emptiness, with unobstructed mind and thus without fear. This is all I mean by viewing the works of art with an empty heart. Without wisdom, says Okumura, compassion doesn't work. And without compassion, wisdom has no meaning. It's not alive. This sutra is about the wisdom that sees emptiness. But how do we see emptiness, you might ask? And what is this emptiness anyway? Here is an enso from 1922 by Nantenbo. And what it says inside is appropriate for our discussion. Born within the enso of the world, the human heart must also become an enso. Emptiness is simply the impermanence of our lives, the lack of a substantial, transcendent identity. We are hollow, but not in the pessimistic way of T.S. Eliot's Hollow Men, whose lips, instead of kissing, says Eliot, form prayers to broken stone. Eliot sets out the first premise, the Buddha's noble truth that life is suffering, but fails to find an answer in what he sees as the wasteland of modern society. Buddhist emptiness, however, is just the opposite of those doomed everyday creatures that Eliot describes, the ones who strive to become solid citizens by playing the game of habit and ambition, chasing the illusions of samsara, the endless round of desire and exhaustion, which lead us only in circles of hell on earth. Now, when we empty ourselves of desire and ambition, say the Buddhist teachings, we cease to suffer. In giving up on a separate self-existence, we can prepare ourselves for reality. As the tea masters might say, only an empty cup can be filled. Like the enso, which can represent both hollowness and wholeness, emptiness or Coup excludes nothing and contains everything. The beginning of the sutra, Kanji Zai Bosatsu, means the bodhisattva who sees clearly. And it's followed by shoken, to illuminate or to view, which means to see very clearly. Thus, the sutra is pretty emphatic. The one who sees clearly sees very clearly that everything that we take for granted as forming our existence is really emptiness. And this is what it means to view the world through the lens of emptiness. And when we view these artworks in this way, we see them as Avalokiteshvara sees them, as one Chinese commentator says, whoever practices unobstructed mind bears the name Avalokiteshvara. What Avalokiteshvara, as the Bodhisattva of compassionate wisdom, sees and hears is the suffering of all beings. But how does he bear it? He bears it because he realizes through the practice of Coup consciousness that this suffering is not the whole story. As the sutra says, there is no suffering and yet no end to suffering. Our suffering exists, but it's temporary, ultimately unsubstantial. Not unlike perhaps the idea that Christ's sacrifice is ultimately reassuring and comic rather than tragic, because the suffering is only temporal, whereas salvation is eternal. In the Buddhist realm, there is relief and reassurance, but unlike in the Christian story, these are not given to us by Avalokiteshvara or by the Buddha, but only by ourselves when we see clearly the nature of reality itself. These figures are only there to point out the nature of reality so that we can find our own way. So if we can come to the state of reassurance or no fear, is this too represented in works of art? In fact, there are several that demonstrate this reassurance explicitly. The standing Buddha from 6th century India, for example, is seen with the hand gesture or Abhaya mudra, which the catalog calls the gesture of reassurance, although I prefer to call it no fear. Another standing Buddha is from Thailand of the late 7th or 8th century. The catalog says that the loss of the hand, quote, makes it impossible to give a specific identification. I want to think, though, that the missing hand was held out in the no fear mudra. The stoic facial expression set as though in contemplation of Coup, and the strong body suggest the embodiment of fearlessness. Even the materials of these two statues suggest a contrast of permanence and impermanence. The copper alloy of the Indian standing Buddha versus the gilded limestone of the Thai standing Buddha. The loss of the limestone hand emphasizes that everything is temporary. Even the Buddha's hand of no fear is empty. As the Heart Sutra says, no eyes, no ears, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, no obstruction in the mind, and thus no fear. I said I prefer to call the mudra no fear, and here's why. My teacher, Robert Livingston, used to say, come to Zazen, climb into your coffin. Leave Zazen, climb out of your coffin. What's the difference? Nothing to fear. Also, the Hanya Shinyo says, thus the Bodhisattva, through this profound practice, has a mind at peace and is without fear. Now, I have in my own collection several depictions of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, but this is my favorite. A standing Buddha with ninja-like spiked fingers in the mudra of no fear. It was drawn by my daughter Isabel when she was 5 years old. She must have overheard me talking and, totally unprompted by me, picked up charcoal and paper and was moved somehow to make art out of spoken words. Years later, when I was trying to find a title for my book on Zen, I put my teacher's saying beside my daughter's drawing, and thus had both a frontispiece for my book and its title, No Fear Zen. Well, I hope it's now a little clearer what I mean by the idea of viewing a work of art, especially Buddhist art, through the empty heart. Born within the Enso of the world, the human heart must also become an Enso. I don't mean to imply anything sentimental or emotional, which might be called viewing from the heart or with the heart. To view these works through the heart of the Heart Sutra is to view them with an attitude of mushotoku mind, without expectation, with complete openness, and with a sense of the philosophy of Coup. We in the West might tend to think of the empty heart as symbolic of sadness, grief, or cold-heartedness. But on the contrary, the empty heart, in Mahayana Buddhist terms, is a heart capable of being filled again and again and again, with the capacity for endless compassion, like that of the Bodhisattva. It makes perfect sense when you think about it. A full heart is a heavy heart. An empty heart is light, transparent, clear, like the heart of a child. The empty heart is like an inso, the emptiness that contains everything. Everything that contains emptiness. Capacious and all-forgiving, the empty heart mocks the vast storage and computing capacities of our overactive thinking brains. Like Shariputra, we have to be taught what really matters, to let go of our attachments, to let go of differences between holy and unholy, pure and impure, even our attachment to Buddhism itself and to the idea of emptiness itself. Then we can begin, like Avalokiteshvara and like the Buddha in his monumental samadhi that we began with, to see things as they are, empty of our distorting preconceptions, expectations, conceptualizations, and judgments. Now, it's in the nature of religious art to provide more than an object of aesthetic appreciation. What was once an object of veneration, concentration, edification, loses some of its aura and becomes a museum piece. In this translation from culture to culture and in this transmutation over time, something is definitely lost. But what do we expect in a world in which nothing lasts forever, in which everything is constant change or mujo? But that doesn't mean that these works lose their power. There's no need to be a religious adherent to appreciate religious art. The power of a work to move us is based not on belief in some doctrine or outmoded philosophy, but in the authenticity of living experiences, emotions, and values common to us all here and now. I was struck by the description of the Rockefeller's collection of Asian art in the catalog as being noteworthy for its, quote, human scale, and their taste for a work's, quote, capacity to be understood and enjoyed by the interested layman, rather than only to be studied by the specialized scholar. The religious or philosophical context I've been trying to provide here today may or may not be helpful. But we really don't need to know all that much about Buddhist doctrine, much less believe in it, because the point of this doctrine is that doctrine is not the point. If it were, then we wouldn't need art at all. The Victorian poet Robert Browning has his Italian Renaissance painter Fra Lippo Lippi say just something similar. If blind belief in doctrine was the point, says Lippo, what need of art at all? A skull and bones, 2 bits of sticks nailed crosswise, or what's best, a bell to chime the hour with, does as well. These works mirror our appreciation of human suffering, our wish to discover its origin and to eliminate it. More importantly, though, they encourage us to find our place in the nature of reality. How do we fit in? Where do we belong? And am I as important as I am afraid I am? The power of these works lies in their showing us something not just to contemplate, but something to emulate. the searching spirit of Madhyayana and Shariputra, their respect and reverence for their teacher, the compassionate wisdom of Avalokiteshvara, and the strong posture and serene expression of the Buddha's enlightenment. The art historical descriptions of these works are helpful in understanding the mundane wisdom that they have for us. And we might find that knowing something about the religious contexts of the Heart Sutra helps to grasp the metaphysical wisdom they contain. But in the end, the transcendental wisdom they embody might best be seen when we look at them with that pre-knowledge or prajna that can be grasped by the almost empty heart of a 5-year-old.